Our first speaker is well regarded throughout the world as a pioneer in medicine and leadership. Dr. Freda Lewis-Hall has been on the front lines of healthcare for more than 40 years as a clinician, researcher, and leader in the biopharmaceuticals and life sciences industries. She served in various leadership roles at a number of pharmaceutical companies. Most recently, she served as Chief Patient Officer and Executive Vice President at Pfizer. Prior to that, she was Pfizer's Chief Medical Officer. Well, today she's going to speak to us about how we can ensure that we're inclusive in research, clinical settings, and the delivery of care. Dr. Lewis-Hall.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. It's very much coming home. I spent a decade at Eli Lilly and Company, where Indiana was my home, and many of you were my colleagues, and it feels great to be back. Disparities, equity, diversity, inclusion, none of these are new words. For my 40 years in medicine, they've been on the tongues of many. We have reports, we've tried some actions. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much progress to date in the space. But many of my colleagues who work on diversity and inclusion, who focus on health equity or health disparities, believe that now is the time that real change will be accelerated, that we'll move farther, faster than we've ever moved before. And today, I'd like to share a few comments about why I think this is the case, and also how it might be accelerated by the work of us who are gathered here today. The last 18 months have really been a lot. My husband always says, people don't change when they see the light, they change when they feel the heat. And I have to say that COVID and many other world and local events have provided more than enough heat and light for us to consider change. And I think there are probably three dimensions that force our thinking in this space. The first is the inspiration of realized risk. And that is simply this: who would have thought it? Who would have thought it? So yes, we've done risk analyses, we've experienced pandemics before, but the impact of this felt by this generation at this time has taught us many lessons. And you heard with the previous introductions, many of those, so I won't repeat them. But one of the lessons that we learned was really around disparate impacts or disproportionate impacts on certain communities. We asked over and over, why? Why does the Native American community suffer such disproportionate death? Why does the African American community have such a higher infection rate, disproportionate hospitalizations, and higher death rates? We could go on and on with the disparities that have been brought to the forefront by COVID, but they're in our face, like right in our face, and we're asking these questions, and we now want to have the answers in hand so that we can drive action. The second is what I call the inspiration of self-reflection, that many of the whys, why is this happening? Why is this disproportionate impact? Why does it exist? Those things, in addition, lead us to introspection. We understand now that there is a clear difference that's made by social determinants of health. We've spoken of them for years. Some of them just very simple concepts on where healthcare is, what is available. We saw the fact that some people live in multi-generational homes or in more crowded environments, or that there was a higher prevalence of underlying conditions in one group over another, or there was no PPE available, or people were disproportionately in essential roles that required them to be in contact with others. We could go on and on with the social determinants that, if we paid attention to them, and we did, allowed us to understand what groups were at greater risk for infection, hospitalization, and ultimately for death. So those realizations around social determinants also led us to what I'm going to call structural determinants of health. These would be ageism, racism, structural differences in economic availability or education, those things that happen each and every day and are part of the way, unfortunately, that our communities and our cultures and our work is built, which means that some people are less available, if you would, to the incredible work that we're doing in the biohealth industries. And thirdly is the inspiration of doability. I think that we as a collective healthcare industry will be held to a bit of a different standard, because for years and years, we've talked about how long it takes to develop a vaccine or a medicine, to evolve a new diagnostic, to make things available, to manufacture, to scale, to deliver them. But we've proven in this instance that we're able to do a whole range of things that before may not have seemed possible to us. But now we have the inspiration of doability for ourselves and for those who have watched us and understand the important work that we do. So I think that we'll have an opportunity inspired by what's happened around us and what we've learned from that. We've been inspired by a greater understanding and facing some of the things that we may have an opportunity as a collective to change in our culture and our healthcare applications. And last but not least, we now know that some things that we may have thought were impossible are now possible. So what will we as an industry, now the why is here in front of us, what do we think the changes can and should be that will drive a better inclusion, diversity, and better health and health outcomes for everyone? The first change, first let me say, I don't think we've done nothing as an industry. I think we've done a lot. There's been a focus on workforce diversity, for example, which we understand is very important, on community outreach and patient engagement, on diversity in clinical trials. Many companies have divisions and have made real progress in the development of methodologies that would lead to improved reflection of the communities that we serve that will benefit from our medicines and our diagnostics and our devices. So we've done much work in that space. There have been leaps and bounds in neglected, rare, genetically mediated disorders, especially for some underrepresented populations. So all of these things have been in the works, and I think that we've made good progress. But I think that it needs to be accelerated, and we'll have an opportunity to do so now. So, but what? I think there are some opportunities, and I look forward to discussing them with colleagues. First is the focus. We're very scientific and very reliant on our science to prove out our hypotheses and to take them reliably to the patients that we serve. I think some of our shift will come, though, from the power of our science to the power of people and power of patients. And so leading into more lively, enduring, and tight relationships with patients and the community, not only giving to the community, but letting the community tell us what they need, how they think they need it, how they'll best receive it. And again, we're seeing some of this with the vaccine uptake, where having it is fine, but if you can't get it to patients, or when you get it to patients, they're resistant to it, you still don't meet your mark. I think that in addition to that, patients are going to be expecting some close to our long diagnostic windows. Many diseases still take years and years to be discovered in patients by the nature of the diagnostic work that we do, but also the diagnostic tools that we have. And I think that that gap is likely to be closed. And in addition to finding earlier, there'll be an expectation around not just identification, but prophylaxis and early detection and early treatment. We'll go from generalized to kind of a bit of everybody to customized, precise, and personalized. And again, we're seeing this with our capabilities in understanding different subgroups of patients. I always say that I remember the war on cancer starting, that it was one thing. We now realize that it's 20 things, 100 things, 1,000 things. And that clarity, I believe, we're about to bring to some of the other diseases that maim us or kill us, diabetes, Alzheimer's, we could go on and on. I think we'll also change our tools. So our focus will change, our tools will change. We'll go from data as power and a secret to data sharing and empowering our capability with mega data sets or metadata sets to be able to do analytics that answer some of the questions that have eluded us. We'll learn the power of torturing data until it confesses, and we'll learn things that we couldn't ourselves hypothesize, but that the data will reveal. We'll move to some digital diagnostics and therapeutics that'll be powered by data accessibility, by AI, and by what I like to call radical interoperability, so that the power of the data that I have and the power of the data that you have will join together to make even bigger differences. And last but not least, to what I call technovative work in medicine. So, pushing into the nanotechnology, 3D printing, sound and light, like focused ultrasound. We could go on and on with the incredible technology that we'll have at hand to us tomorrow and then long into the future. And then last but not least, I think that we'll have a model change. And this is actually one of my favorites. And that is when I first came into the health industry, very much of what we did was what we did. It was our organization, our institution, us as individual practitioners in whatever we were practicing. And now I believe that we're going to have partnerships that transcend even the powerful partnerships that we have today. Another lesson we learned over the last 18 months. Who would have thought shared manufacturing to get the number of doses available around the world of a vaccine to be what it's been? Imagine the data sharing that we did pre-competitively around the development of therapeutics and vaccines over the last 18 months. Think about how we've partnered with unexpected partners to get the vaccines deployed to people who otherwise may have been out of reach. So I think that we're going to evolve the definition of partner, if you would, and make it more powerful. And I believe that patients will for sure be a part of that. I had an interesting moment at a conference early in my time at Pfizer where I, sat very proudly and talked about patient engagement and that we're engaging patients and how important patient engagement was. And an advocate for patients reached over and touched me on my knee. She said, "Honey, we've been engaged for a while. It's time that we get married." And I've never forgotten that. And she has been a great mentor and supporter of and teacher of work on how to understand the patient journey better and to better serve the needs of patients in very real and demonstrable ways. I also think that we have a last but not least opportunity in doing cross-discipline, cross-sector work. Lessons that we might be able to learn from aerospace, or lessons that we might be able to learn from deep sea exploration. You could go on and on with what people are learning in non-typically recognized health sectors, but that could empower and enrich the work that we do. So I've given a long list of what ifs and can we's, and I believe that all are possible. I'm beginning to believe that all are probable. And I'm hoping that we together will be able to respond to the whys and deploy the whats in the shift of our focus, in the deployment of the tools that we have and the ones that we'll develop. And last but not least, that we'll learn to work together and more holistically in a way to reduce disparities, improve the goal of health equity, and address diversity and inclusion. I'll stop here and look forward to learning more from you and hearing your thoughts.
Well, Dr. Lewis-Hall, thank you so much for your time and for your insight and for your optimism. You know, there are so many facets of this industry that we can change to be inclusive, and her work and perspective will certainly help medicine around the world.